Good morning. My name is Ed Sewell, and the title of our talk this morning is Generative AI, Opportunities and Risk Hidden in the Clouds. So just to give our discussion this morning some context. So when we talk about opportunities, we're talking about growth opportunities for businesses, but we're also looking at business risks that impact security leaders as well as the C-suite and their entire organization. As we're starting to move into the era of AI, primarily with generative AI, those workloads are now moving to the cloud. And there's a transformation even within the cloud that is workloads are now moving to the edge of the cloud, which is termed distributed cloud edge. So in that scenario, it increases the business risk because there's less visibility on the data that's being mined by generative AI or insights that are being derived by generative AI systems, and where does that data reside? So we see a cosmic shift in the market today from a centralized cloud where we have data and analytics and enterprise leaders, security leaders. They see where their data is. They have heavy visibility into their data through dashboards, through reports. Now, as we start to move into the AI era and data now moves to the edge or where it's generated at the edge through various devices, those same leaders start to lose visibility. So just giving some context as to our discussion this morning. A little about me. My name is Ed Sewell. I'm the founder and CEO of Velocity. Velocity is an AI safety and security innovator. We've pioneered many innovations within the AI space. Just one example that we're very proud of is a project years ago called the Mobile Health ID Initiative, where we pioneered the use of AI for capturing immunization records for children and mothers in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. We've also pioneered innovations in smart cities and smart communities around the world, as well as in enterprise applications and services that are embedded or integrated in many of the services that you use today. So that's my background. Also, as an innovator, Velocity, we created the world's first and only data security standards for generative AI systems and large language models. Today, we're acting as a contributor to the Cloud Security Alliance's AI Technology Risk Management Group, as well as other groups, to share some of our innovation, our thought leadership, in order to help continue to shape the space. So what we like to do is step back and just imagine a connective world where responsible AI systems help make life easier, safer, and more secure for everyone. So if we think about AI in the sense of how does it help humanity, again, we go back to making life easier through various devices, services that we see in our homes, in our cities that we live in, at our jobs. We also see where AI, the technology, can help also make life safer for us and even enhance security. So let's just think about it in a wider sense of how AI helps humanity. So now let's take a look at the problem that's presented to making that vision a reality. So going back to security, securing generative AI systems is a complex data management problem. So again, I spoke earlier about the transformational shift of the business landscape as it relates to cloud, distributed cloud edges, but also 5G technology as far as telecommunications is concerned. So just to step back again, to add some context. Over the last few years, there's been a transformation where there's been partnerships between your cloud service providers or hyperscalers, as they may be referred to, and your telecom network operators, where telecom network operators have the 5G connectivity and networking infrastructure in place. Technology called mobile edge computing, for example, that helps companies process data at a faster rate than ever imagined before. Now, on the other hand, we have AI companies, large AI companies like a Microsoft or a Google, who have developed AI technology and invested in that for years and have pioneered a lot of innovations in that space. So the two now are starting to combine. So the cloud services provider and your telecom network providers are now co-locating infrastructure and services to create what's called the cloud edge. And that cloud edge, again, distributes data not only in a centralized fashion, but at the edge of the network. So, for example, I talked earlier about smart cities. So you think of smart city services like transportation, for example, at airports. This now allows airports to monitor the traffic flow within the airport facility itself and process that data right there at the airport versus that data transferring to a centralized cloud. In an enterprise setting, it allows infrastructure to be placed at the retail location, for example. And now those payment transactions can be processed faster, but also more intelligently connected to that consumer device. So those are just two examples of why this shift was made and how that shift is creating new business models and creating new value, but it's also making the security landscape more complex. So how does that come back to the enterprise opportunity? Many enterprises today have been data-driven. At the base of their business model is data monetization. So collecting, analyzing data, one, either direct monetization, where it's the opportunity to sell specific data sets or share specific data sets, or indirect monetization, where that data is now collected in order to create better customer experiences, get better insights on customers, competitors, employee productivity is another use case. So businesses have been using data for years now, and this is not new. They've been using data to create new insights and create new revenue streams. What's different is now generative AI allows these companies to use the data sets to create insights and new products and services faster, and in light, create revenue streams faster. So that's the enterprise opportunity. Can enterprises leverage their data, share it with generative AI systems, again, that are in the cloud or at the edge, and generate new revenue streams? That's the enterprise opportunity that we see today. Now, if we look at it from a macroeconomic view, the generative AI market opportunity, the global opportunity. So McKinsey, for example, says that generative AI can create 2.6 trillion to 4.4 trillion annually in economic value across multiple industries. So some of the use cases that I mentioned earlier, as generative AI is being adopted at a faster pace by businesses, by governments, by nonprofits, that's an opportunity, one, from an economic standpoint, to be able to create those new revenue streams faster through new products, services, and experiences. Governments can serve their constituents better, deliver better government services, and then the economic value that this creates for society. Healthcare is just one example that comes to mind, and there's many others. So going back to the microeconomic view or landscape and how it relates to security, how it relates to cloud. So generative AI, again, we talked about the move of the cloud to the distributed edge, more services at the edge, closer to where data is produced and consumed. Uh, we've also talked about how data now resides not just at a central location through a centralized cloud or in the control of a centralized telecom operator in what's called their core network. Now we're talking about data being distributed and decentralized. We're also talking about a higher volume of data, a higher variety of data, a higher velocity of data that's now being shared and analyzed by generative AI systems that the enterprises may or may not own or have visibility into how their data is being processed. So now this creates new security problems. And specifically, the risk has to deal with the monetary value that companies can create with their data. For example, if you ever take a look at a balance sheet on a public company, there's a line that says intangible assets. Within the last few years, there's been a lot of talk about putting as part of that line on the balance sheet or financial statement the amount of revenue that's being created through the monetization of data as part of that statement. So I'm going to step back for a second. Private companies have, startups in particular, we look at startup valuations in the millions, hundreds of millions. Now, those that go into the billions, they typically have proprietary data assets that they use in order to create their models, whether it's language models or foundational models, that now are able to generate new insights, create new products and services. So they've created their moat, if you will, through their data assets. And that in turn has increased the value of that startup. We've seen startups like Anthropic, for example, or OpenAI that now have valuations that are double or more of companies, public companies that have been in business for decades. And that in large part is because the proprietary nature of the technology, one, but also their data assets. So now we're starting to see a shift within public companies now looking to capitalize on that same opportunity because they have years of historical data, but they also have access to customers that are creating new data, whether that's individuals, whether that's be created through the Internet of Things, through various devices, what have you. They're creating new data sets and new data assets. And now the opportunity with generative AI in the cloud is being able to use that infrastructure to generate new revenue streams. And so that monetary value now, because of the security challenges that generative AI presents, puts the monetary value that you create with your data at risk. So with that, if anyone in the audience has ever done a security risk assessment or a security review, they know that typically there has not been an area within that review that specifically asks questions about AI systems, particularly generative AI. So now it's creating new security questions. And again, those security questions, if they go unanswered, they create new risk. And again, going back to what the risks are, the data as an asset has monetary and economic value, and that's what's at risk. So if we drill down even further, there's other questions. Where did my data sets originate from? Very important question, data lineage. Where did my data come from? Who owns the data? Who owns the product, services, insights that are derived from the data? Because we know generative AI can create new insights and new data sets and new content. So if we have raw data, for example, that's owned by the enterprise now shares that data with the cloud services provider because the cloud services provider has the AI technology and infrastructure. And then that's also shared through that pipeline with the telecom network operator that now has the 5G capabilities and infrastructure to be able to process that data even faster, who owns the end product? And then from a security risk, if that data is now shared between at least three parties, not including third parties that are involved, then who shares the risk? And so that becomes a new question that is challenging a traditional shared responsibility model that's been pioneered by the Cloud Security Alliance. Another question, who is using my data and for what purpose? So if we go back to the original value proposition, the monetary value of the data assets in particular, that can be monetized using generative AI and can create in a private company valuations in the tens of billions of dollars. And public, more established companies, going back to the estimates or market projections by McKinsey, we're talking in the trillions of dollars now. That question becomes a key question, and it's a two-part question. Who is using my data? That becomes who's using it, who's authorized to use it, but more specifically, who's monetizing my data? And then for what purposes? And then when did my data change custody? And that goes back to the origination of the data, but also from a security perspective, taking this back to the security questions, as the data changes hands from multiple stakeholders, as we talked about with the cloud services provider, the telecom network operator, the enterprise, and then the third-party suppliers, when that data now has changed custody or changed hands, who's responsible for, one, keeping it safe, two, keeping it secure, three, making sure that the data is trustworthy and it doesn't cause security vulnerabilities or introduce security vulnerabilities into my business? So these are key questions now that come up that need answers. So with that, the big question now becomes, how do you know your data is safe, secure, and trustworthy? Now, if we go back to the original premise and traditional data management and data analytics, you can answer typically the first two parts of that question, safety and security, through different security reviews and controls that are in place. In the era of generative AI, now the question comes up, is my data trustworthy? And step back, why is that trustworthy question so now, again, so important? One risk in particular that's one of the biggest risks that we see today is called data poisoning attacks. And with data poisoning, data sets can be manipulated and introduce new vulnerabilities into generative AI models, large language models, that now change the output of that model, that creates new safety and security problems, but also not just from a data standpoint, safety and security, but also as it relates to human life and property. So for example, we used earlier within smart cities. So think of a city being connected, and that city is now becoming autonomous in the sense of the traffic lights, the transportation systems. So within a data poisoning attack, the research shows that now that becomes a vulnerability. For example, just simple things that we take for granted, like the changing of the light from red to green, can that be manipulated? Some of our airport safety systems, can they be, in other transportation systems, if they're using AI systems and that data is poisoned, can they be manipulated? That again can cause issues not with the data itself, but now with human life and property. What are the new security risks that are introduced? Because again, we talked about this distributed nature of the cloud and not being clear lines of demarcation as far as invisibility as to where is my data, who's using my data, and for what purposes. And then going back to the trustworthiness question, how do I know that my data is trustworthy, that it hasn't been manipulated, that it hasn't, that new threats and vulnerabilities have been introduced through data poisoning that now corrupts the entire training set and the entire AI system as far as its outputs. So these are new questions that we need to continue to analyze to understand better what the risks are so that we can create risk mitigation strategies in order to get back to our original vision that we talked about. Imagine a world that uses responsible AI systems to make life easier, safer, and more secure for everyone. We can get there, but first we need to understand what are the opportunities, what are the risks, and then create new strategies and implement those strategies in order to make our data, our people, our world safer and more secure. Thank you.